Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Be sure to check out the Green Building Matters community, where you can have unlimited exam prep for any of the professional credential exams you're tackling next, as well as putting your continuing education on autopilot, saving time with GBS reporting your hours on your behalf. Check it out, gbes.com/join. Now, enjoy this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. Today, we've got a special guest. This is a special guest because she's a client, she's a friend, and actually a freshly minted LEED fellow. We've got Sara Neff with Kilroy Realty with us. Sara, how you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I know we've been wanting to get you on here a while because I know you got a great story to tell. And obviously your company and what you do there on a sustainability front really are known as a leader and a trailblazer. So we'll get into all that. But I've got to ask, where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
I'm from Washington, D.C., actually, which is unusual for us out in Los Angeles. But I'm a D.C. native. And the school question answers why I ended up in Los Angeles. I went to Stanford undergrad, where I met my husband, who is a television writer. That's why we live in Los Angeles now. And then I actually, I went to business school to focus on social enterprise. So I went to Columbia for Business School in New York.
Those are some great schools. And So obviously your husband's work kind of kept you in California there, Southern California. And so connect some dots like, sustainability, seeing that business background, the social side of things. Heck, maybe just now some of the programs we work in, right, Sara, are pushing more on the social side. But, when did you first realize you might do something with green and green buildings?
Yes, I know the answer to this question. So when I graduated from undergrad, I did a bunch of sort of crazy things. I lived in London for a while. I lived in India for a while. And because I was in love with my now husband, I ended up in Los Angeles and spent a few years working in television. And as far as brief stints in television go, I think I got fairly lucky. I got to work on Arrested Development. I got to work on 24. But I got to a point not very long into my entertainment career when I looked at my life and realized I was just working on shows about white people in New York. It's like, how many shows about white people in New York do we need? And so I wasn't happy. Sat down with my now husband and we made this little spreadsheet of all the things I'm good at and not good at and what I want out of my career and whatnot. And he said, Sara, it looks like you want a role that has social or environmental good at a company, and it looks like you should go to business school. And I cried because I was like, I don't want to go to business school. There are bankers there. I don't want to know bankers, which is very funny because my best friend from business school is an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. But so I did. I left entertainment. Spent a year actually at Google because I have a linguistics background from undergrad and they were looking for people on their linguistics team. And then I went to Columbia to focus on social enterprise and ended up at Kilroy. So it was because I was unhappy with television and wanted to make a difference with my career that I ended up going to business school and finding my way to sustainable real estate.
Fascinating background, but just that moment, it sounds like you knew you wanted something different. It was good to have someone in your corner there, and your now husband just in your corner saying, "Hey, we got this." Right? You need that encouragement along the way. So to connect the dots. I mean, you've been obviously focused on real estate, commercial real estate. Maybe tell the audience here a little more about Kilroy and the fact that you develop new properties. You obviously own and manage a lot of properties up and down the West Coast. So tell everybody a little more about what attracted you to Kilroy and tell us what you've been doing there.
Yeah, so Kilroy is a publicly traded real estate investment trust. It is active on West Coast markets from San Diego to Seattle. So major presence in Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego. And then it's about 13 to 14 million square feet mostly office space with some life science, residential, and retail thrown in, but it's primarily office. And we're developers. So we have approximately, depending on how you count what's in entitlements, another 5 million square feet in development. And what I really love about Kilroy is that we have so many of the right market forces to make sustainability happen. We serve a primarily tech and media tenant base. Obviously, it's a diversified tenant base, but it's a lot of tech. And those folks really, really care about sustainability for it. And so we are able to, have the justification for a lot of our sustainability programs based on leasing. The other thing about our markets is that California and Seattle have local government that's also very proactive on sustainability. So there's a lot of regulation that supports our sustainability efforts and, inspires us to get ahead of the curve, as well as opportunities to do things like procure offsite renewables that are green. So there's a lot of really great things about the company and the market, but I love the culture at Kilroy. John Kilroy hired me directly for this role, and he has a real belief that you should hire the right people and then let them do their jobs. And so that's what it was. I came in and I started the program from scratch. But he has always really been a champion of our sustainability programs from day one. And so many people in my job work at, other real estate companies, and the CEO isn't a true believer, and it makes things so much harder. But John Kilroy has always been really on the side of doing the right thing environmentally. And between his commitment to the environment and my passion for sustainability, we've really been able to make a great program.
Oh, wow. I love it. No, what a great place to work. And I'm glad to know you guys, and everybody in our team is just fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about that career path again. And I like to talk about mentors or even influencers. So looking back, is there anyone that you, Sarah, would call a mentor, or maybe just someone that had some influence with you along the way?
Yes. One of the people, it'd be interesting to see if she listens to this. Her name is Sukiana Pasiurak, who ran sustainability at Vornado. And I remember very distinctly because I ended up at a conference with her in Las Vegas in the middle of July, and I was really pregnant. So I was just so uncomfortable, so hot, didn't want to be there. And but she was there, and she said, "Sarah, let's connect. You're early in your career. I'm actually moving on from Vornado," and she's had a very successful career since then. And I'm going to give you all the advice I wish I had been given. And that was life-changing. She helped me realize the need to advocate for a standalone sustainability budget because the capital budget process doesn't work great for sustainability, because by definition, sustainability isn't the emergency. It's not the piece of equipment that needs to get, upgraded. It's not the spec suite that has to get built out. It's not the, issue that your insurance said was causing a liability problem. And so it's so easy to cut sustainability projects out of a budget. And so she was able to give me the tools I needed to advocate for one. And she also gave me a really great piece of career advice, which was, Sarah, it's your job to keep your job interesting for yourself. It is not anyone else's job. Your boss my bosses at Kilroy have been men. He's like, your boss has his own job. It's not his job to make sure that you stay engaged with your work. That is your job. And I really took that to heart because I've always made sure you can really in sustainability get trapped, as you know, Charlie, in the role of just working on certifications and reporting and maybe you get a little energy efficiency stuff done. And, and then that can be your whole full-time job. And that is a really quick way to burn yourself out after a couple of years. And the reason I think I've had staying power at Kilroy this long is because I took Suki's advice and I really worked hard to expand the program into places I was interested in, into biodiversity, into green leasing, into, carbon neutrality before people were doing that, solar batteries. And a lot of it was, how do I keep this interesting for myself? And so I really appreciate her guidance.
Wow, what a fantastic mentor. I didn't know that. I know Suki, and that's just what a great story. That's what this podcast is about, Sarah, storytelling. So, almost 11 years at Kilroy now. So let's talk about some of the highlights, the projects that just really stand out to you. And then we'll talk a little more about what you're doing today. But, looking back, it's on the highlight reel.
Well, it sort of continues to today. We're recording this in December of 2020. This will be the month that Kilroy gets to carbon neutral operations. I'm putting the finishing touches on that right now. It's going to happen this month, one way or the other. So
That's
the thing I'm the most proud of.
And let's talk about that for a minute, because I think some listeners might not realize that in the last 1 to 2 years, you came out, your CEO came out and said, hey, we're going to do this. And then that shocked the commercial real estate world. It's like, oh, wow, okay. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically what had happened was that the data center companies, so Digital Realty and Iron Mountain, it wasn't, it was noticed by the environmental community that they use a lot of power. A lot of power. And so they got targeted by, the Sierra Club, Greenpeace kind of folks because of their energy spend. And since you can't just pick up a data center that's in the middle of coal country and move it to Washington State, they really had to start getting creative at the time about offsite renewables. And they pioneered the use in real estate of offsite power purchase agreements to be used to essentially offset on-site consumption of power. But those companies are many, many times my size. And so I saw that work being done and realized that I had the opportunity with a deal or two of that nature to get all of Kilroy to carbon neutrally operating. And so I saw that as an opportunity. This was in, I think, late 17 and decided to go for it. So it was a big process. We had on-site solar at the time. We, had a lot of on-site energy efficiency, and we continue that work and have more on-site solar and more energy efficient buildings on a daily basis. But the balance of it has to come from an off-site procurement. So then I had to run the off-site procurement, find a solar developer, utility scale, who's building something of the right timing and size for us. Did that whole process. And then, as you mentioned, the big thing was John's announcement. Like, it wasn't just something that I wanted to tweet about. We were going to be the first American real estate investment trust to declare that we would achieve carbon neutral operations. And so John, like I said, he is somebody who had major commitment to sustainability. And we decided to make that commitment very publicly at the Global Climate Action Summit in 2018. So we got on stage in front of the world and made this commitment for us. And it has changed the real estate industry. We've seen so many now other real estate companies make their own commitments. We've actually been... We actually got beaten on getting to carbon neutral, which, is bittersweet for me. Hudson Pacific actually declared that they were carbon neutrally operating in September, and we won't get there until this month. And they didn't have, a sustainability program, when we started ours. So I love that they saw the value in the work that we were doing and decided to try to one-up us on it. So I think that just shows the amount of influence Kilroy has had over the whole industry, especially in something as important as carbon. So that's what I'm the most proud of.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you're very active on Twitter. So make sure everybody follows Sara on Twitter. And it's the latest. But also, GRESB, right? And how green is your portfolio? You've been a leader there. That's got to be something.
Not to be forgotten. So, we've been very active with GRESB since, I started in 2010. So 2011 was our first year that we disclosed to GRESB. We've done it every single year since then. The sort of funny story about that, it's a little bit of an embarrassing story, but the same, I was pregnant with my older daughter at that time, not the one I was pregnant with. And we'd done GRESB 1 year and we'd done not very well. I'd only been at the job 6 months in the reporting year, didn't have complete data, didn't have this, no carbon, that kind of thing. We hadn't done well. And I was about to go on maternity leave. And so I was like, I'm not going to do GRESB before I go. Nobody will notice. Nobody ever asks about this. It's not important. I think that's going away anyway. And I left. And I was still in the hospital after having given birth to my first daughter when our CFO called. He's like, hey, did you get that GRESB?
Oh, wow.
We left because we have investors to ask. I was like, oh, sure I did. I'll take care of that. And so I ended up doing GRESB in 2012, trying to nurse like a 6-week-old, baby or 6-day-old baby with one arm and GRESB with the other. So we didn't do great that year, but we showed great improvements since then. And so we went from that very low point to, 4 years after I started Kilroy, we were named the number one, company, a real estate company in North America across all asset classes on sustainability. That's now been expanded to the Americas. And I'm happy to say, 7 out of the last 8 years, we've been able to stay on top. We're now a global listed office sector leader. So we have leadership not just in Americas, but globally. And we're the Americas listed sector leader across all asset classes. And it's a really proud moment, especially this year when GRESB as you know, became so much more performance-based. It's not just, do you have your data and do you have all your policies, but let's see you actually step up and reduce the energy like you should be. And the fact that we were able to maintain our position has been really exciting. So I'm very, very proud of that. GRESB has also really shaped our sustainability programs. It's how we, a lot of, our focus on training, our focus on, making sure we have targets in the right ways, science-based target. A lot of that came out of, the things that GRESB asked us, this policy, that policy. And so, it's been a very mutually beneficial to us relationship. So I'm really proud of our GRESB.
On the highlight reel and continue raising the bar there. Let's talk about some projects. You obviously developed some projects too. You've been an early adopter on well, and then you've also done some fit well and some existing buildings. But, talk a little more about these certifications. You have these bigger sustainability goals, but the certifications, the rating systems, their tools, their validation, like what does LEED and well and fit well, what does that do for you guys?
Right. So LEED is the lingua franca, essentially, of sustainability within the real estate community. And so one of the reasons I actually came on board is because John and the Kilroy Board of Directors really recognized the value of LEED and wanted somebody who's going to be able to champion that internally. And so I'm proud to say we're at a point where 68% of the Kilroy portfolio is LEED certified. And that is really what shows our tenants and our investors that we're walking the walk on sustainability. I'm a big believer in third-party verification. I'm a big believer in don't take my word for it. Here's someone else who has signed off on the claims that I'm making. So LEED has been really, really important environmentally. And we've grown along with LEED. As LEED has gotten harder, we've had to up our game. And I think that's really important. Our health program started in 2015, and we really realized the importance of buildings and health, on the impact of buildings on human health and on productivity. It was the work that Joe Allen did out of Harvard that really opened my eyes to, you can have a very energy efficient building, but, if it has no ventilation or everybody's getting sick all the time, it is not a sustainable building. So we started then, and Fitwell was a great tool because it was easy to understand. It was aligned, with the CDC, developed by GSA. It had a lot of the credentials that I would be looking for. And so we've been able to roll that out. Now it's 40% of our portfolio is Fitwell certified. And then Well has been a great tool in development for us. I know there's, overlap between the two, but we use Well in development. So we were able to get the first Well certified rental units in the world. So there were some condos in New York that beat us to it. But in terms of rental units, we have the first ones. Those are in Los Angeles. And then we have, I think, the largest Well core and shell certified building in California, in San Francisco. Well is a very rigorous standard, as you know, Charlie. Yes. It's hard to get through it. But I think it has driven value. And this is especially important to me because I learned firsthand the importance of air quality on health. My younger daughter, who's always the sicker of the two kids, when she was around 2, started coughing herself to sleep every single night. And, as a parent, it's horrible to be helpless when your kid is suffering. Nothing was working. The doctor put her on all these, this breathing mask treatments, and that wasn't working. And then she started putting steroids in my kid, and that wasn't working. And it wasn't until, she got diagnosed with asthma that I finally was like, asthma? I know about asthma. Asthma has environmental triggers. And I can't hear it or see it from my house, but I live not far from a busy freeway in Los Angeles. And I went out, and the Well people actually had introduced me to an air filter. I needed it as, sorry to nerd out, an alternative compliance path on a lobby that wasn't long enough for an entryway. And so I went out and got the filter and then plugged it in at home. And Nora stopped coughing 2 days later and hasn't coughed herself to sleep since. And it's not actually that happy of a story because I'm like, I do this for a living. I'm in the middle of a Well certification at the time, and I didn't make the connection. And so I really wanted to have a long focus on building health. And the certifications in health are super helpful. And I can say maybe as a breaking item on this podcast, we are pursuing the Well Health Safety Rating now for our directly managed portfolio. And so I'm hoping to get that closed out by the end of the year as well, so that when people want to reoccupy our buildings, they're confident that Kilroy has done, again, third party everything to make those buildings safe to reoccupy.
Yeah, that pandemic response, those new labels just make sense. But before we started the podcast, you and me both, I told you I just brought my treadmill desk home from the office that we leased that I haven't been to in months. So shame on me. We have to bake in all of this green and healthy best practices at home too. Let's talk a little bit about the future. And I love asking lead fellow like you, just someone that's really passionate about this. And I know a lot of this is probably influenced by where you're at in California. I've had Dan Burgoyne on the podcast a while back.
Yes.
On the seaside, and just a lot of people there. But what should we be reading up on now? Sarah, if someone's listening and they're like, wow, this is really exciting. Like, what are you tracking that we should be reading up on? What's around the corner in this green building movement?
Yeah, so it's two things. One is embodied carbon or upfront carbon. That is the wave of the future. I think it's one of the things in sustainability for those of us who developed real estate that we pretended that the entire environmental impact of our buildings was, within the energy consumption of the building. And we weren't really paying attention to the big environmental impact of carbon. And as it turns out, it takes 30 years, essentially, for a building's operations before the carbon emitted in the energy that the building is consuming to equal the upfront carbon. 30 years. For the first 30 years of building's life, the larger impact is the embodied carbon of the construction materials. And we weren't paying attention to that. It was only at Greenbuild last year, which seems like an age ago with COVID, but it's Greenbuild 19 in Atlanta, where the EC3 tool was formally rolled out, it's a great tool to give us insight into the embodied carbon of our construction materials and help us manage it. The tool it's evolving. It's not always the easiest thing to use, but it's really critically important. So people should be reading up on embodied carbon. That is where the environmental work really needs to be happening right now. The other thing, as you mentioned, with where we're located, it's all about the phrase climate value at risk. How does a company that owns or develops real estate assets understand what of that value, of the gross asset value of its assets, is at risk because of climate change and over what time horizon? And so it's not easy to figure it out. And unfortunately, there's a bunch of different methodologies that don't always agree. But that is the thing to grapple with because that is going to be the major thing that impacts real estate over the next 10 years. So embodied carbon, climate value at risk.
Yeah, I totally echo that. And we can carbon, right? I mean, if we were to sum some of that up too, is the conversation's just changed to carbon. I think you've been having it for a while. Yeah. Your firm, you put a price on carbon. You really take a look at that with projects you do. So the art of here, wellness is already happening. Obviously, the pandemic's put a push on us to build that confidence back with pandemic response, get everybody back to these buildings. And how do you show them? How do you prove that this is a healthy building? One question I might ask someone like you is, we've got green leases, but do you think we'll have healthy building leases? How are these conversations going to go in the next 18 months as tenants, want to change the layout of their space and move some desks or say, hey, we need more collaboration, but now we let our employees work from home 2 days a week and we never thought we'd do that. So, healthy building leases, is that happening? Will it happen? What do you think?
So I have not seen it happen, but I really would love for it to happen. I talked about this in the TEDx talk I did in 2018, which is what I would love to see is a tenant come in, and it drives me completely crazy that I don't see this, given the mountain of research that is out there. Leases will say you will give me a temperature of plus or minus 72 degrees often. That's not every lease, obviously, but that's often. The fact that the lease doesn't then in the next sentence say, and you will give me a CO2 count of 550 parts per million or less on average, taken readings over, X number of times per year. That, because I know, do a lot of indoor air quality work with us, that needs to be in leases. I do not understand why CEOs basically allow their employees to work suboptimally because they're not demanding healthy indoor air from the landlord. And so obviously, I always say that, as you know, Charlie, there's a trade-off between lots of ventilation and energy consumption. That's something, especially in a post-reoccupancy world, that we're going to have to really be balancing. But absolutely, I don't see a request for healthy buildings in the lease, particularly. But I think it's a really important area. And I think, CEOs of companies who are trying to get an edge should absolutely, demand in the way that I see many leases demanding Energy Star and many leases demanding LEED, that they should demand certain levels of health as well.
It's fantastic. All right, well, let's talk a little more about you. And we like to share some pro tips, I like to call it here. But what would you say, Sarah, is your specialty or gift? What are you best at?
I think I'm a great public speaker. And I think that that's really important because, and maybe the people listening to this podcast will disagree with that. I think the thing that is really important with sustainability is storytelling. And can you tell the story of why this is important? Can you get everybody inspired, get on board to do the sustainability work that we all wanted? And so I think I'm comfortable speaking in front of an audience, and I'm comfortable telling the story. And I think it's really been something that's hopefully that other Kilroy employees have found inspiring. So that's I think, Mice in the hole a bit. I think the other thing I will actually say, we talked earlier about my time working in entertainment, and people sometimes ask me, like, do you regret it? Like, do you wish you hadn't spent those years doing that and that you'd gotten going on your sustainable real estate journey earlier? And I say no. And I say no for this particular reason, which is working in entertainment really just stomped out of me any sense that I was too good for anything. Like I came out, more or less newly minted from Stanford, maybe have thought I was a little bit fancy pants. And then no, you are making copies, you're getting coffee, you are listening to other people try to schedule with their ex-wife who's going to the baseball game on the phone so you can take those notes. And it's not glamorous. And that was great because when I got to Kilroy and we needed somebody to do a whole lot of data entry off paper invoices on energy to really benchmark the whole portfolio, I had no problems jumping in. I wasn't looking around seeing where there was an intern to do that work for me. So I think that's the other thing, not remotely afraid to get my hands dirty and pretty good at the story too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially those you lead, you have a team, a sustainability team you build there too, right? You have to be willing to do the things you're asking them to do.
Oh, yeah.
That connects. Do you have any good habits, any routines or rituals?
Well, the book I would recommend to your listeners is a book called How to Have a Good Day, which is a book on productivity research. And one of my, so I have a couple things. One is don't check email first thing in the morning. So at night, you should, when you're ready to stop working, and when COVID, that's always a hazy time now, you write down the list of the things you want to get accomplished early in the morning. They have to be pretty, distinct. Like you can't write GRESB on that list. Obviously, that's a big project, but this GRESB question or looking up that piece of backup documentation, a list of, somewhere 1 to 5 things, and you get those things accomplished before you open your email. And then that way you're not sort of wasting your most sort of productive brain hours on being responsive. Being responsive is important as well, but you have to be proactive. So that's important. And then for me, especially in COVID, every day I have to work out in the morning. That is really important for my mental health. I also make sure I walk 10,000 steps every day, and then just doing other stuff. I also have to read a book 10 minutes every day. And my kids go to Spanish immersion school, and I also make sure that I practice Spanish every day. And having those things sort of ground me really makes me be able to really focus when it's time to focus on work.
Those are great habits. Thanks for sharing. Bucket list. I'm a fan of the bucket list. Are there 1 or 2 things you could share that might be on your bucket list?
Sure. Happy to. One, I love travel, and it's been hard in COVID not to be able to do that. So I have a couple of places. I really want to see Easter Island. I really want to, and my husband and I are wine people. So I would love to spend some time in Chile, touring around Santiago, maybe doing some tasting there and going to Easter Island. I have also another travel goal of getting to Iceland, and there's some other places in the world I really want to see. And then personal bucket list, one of the things that our professional bucket list, rather, I heard a statistic, and it was a couple of years ago, so I'm hoping things have improved, that there are more men named John on the boards of energy companies than there are women, which drives me crazy. So I do have eventually a career goal of serving on a board of directors, because that is a major glass ceiling that women have. It's been very hard for women to break.
Absolutely. So, well, I know you've been very active on that front. Those are great bucket list items, some adventure and some meaningful work. And it all goes back to some of the social upbringing there and those early studies, and that's what's really been important to you. So I'm inspired by that, Sarah. Books, you mentioned one earlier about productivity. Is there maybe even another book you'd recommend?
Yes, there are 2 books. I would recommend. I love reading. I'm a big reader. So one book I would recommend, it's a bit outdated at this point because it came out 5 years ago. So it's based on work that came out a little bit even before that, but it's a book called The Grid by Gretchen Bachke, which talks about just why our energy grid is the way it is. The grid is something a lot of people take for granted, but Charlie, you and I work in trying to make buildings more sustainable. How buildings relate to the grid is evolving. And I think it's really important to understand sort of how the grid came to be what it is. So loved that book. And then on the sort of diversity and inclusion side, I could not possibly recommend more the book Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. It came out in 2019, and it was incredibly eye-opening, especially on the building side of things, on basically like we live in a world designed around men. And so, for example, in buildings, I am always cold in office buildings because the ASHRAE thermal comfort standards were designed around men in suits in the 50s. And men in suit, that's multiple sleeves, right? You're wearing on each arm. And so they don't need as much warmth in their office space as me as a woman who typically, again, only has one set of sleeves on me. And so just this concept of how the world is designed and what we can do about it. And basically the concept that collecting sex disaggregated data is a way to make things fairer. For example, women in America are more likely to die in car accidents because there are no female crash test dummies. We only have a male crash test dummy. We have a smaller male test dummy that is sort of female size, but it's no female proportions, but it's only ever tested in the passenger seat. And so women are always, quote, out of position in cars. This translates to design, how, designing grates that always trap your high heels. I've seen stairs that are clear. What woman in a skirt wants to walk up clear stairs? Thermal comfort. There's so many ways that we can make our buildings, and not just the bathrooms, right? We can make our buildings more inclusive. And I think Invisible Women is a great book to read to really open your eyes about the opportunities you have to make things more inclusive wherever you're influencing decisions in your life.
Wow, that's great. We'll link to those books in the podcast show notes. Those are solid. Thank you for the, even just the visuals there. It's like, okay, I didn't think about that. We have to do that. So as we come to a close here, 2 questions. Is there an example of a piece of career advice you wish you'd had a little earlier? It sounds like luckily you had a great mentor there for some of it, but is there any career advice you wish you'd known earlier?
Wow. I have had just a very, very blessed career. I would say to a lot of people to really consider, if not business school, a background in business. One of my major career regrets is I didn't think I was going to work in real estate, and I didn't take any real estate classes in business school. This is an embarrassing but true story. I really thought I was going to end up in renewable energy project management on a utility scale. That's what I was interviewing for when I ended up at Kilroy. And I took far too many classes on social enterprise, on good nonprofit management. And those are all really important. And I used that information. But I really wish I had the foresight to really get into the business fundamentals. I mean, you have to make sustainability make business sense. And it makes great business sense. So I really am internally grateful that Columbia made me take accounting and made me take corporate finance because I didn't understand the fundamentals behind how the books are created. I wouldn't understand how to make the business case for sustainability. But I had to learn that on the fly. So I had a background in that from business school, but I didn't have enough background in real estate from business school. Just understanding what a cap rate is, what compresses cap rates, what's NOI, how does this operational cost, how does CapEx affect that? Having to learn that on the job was harder than if I'd had to learn it, I'd been able to learn it in school, but I was too focused on thinking that I would only need to take classes around saving the world that I didn't get the business fundamentals. So my major piece of career advice is take the time to understand the business fundamentals. Environmental people tend to just only want to talk sustainability, but you have to speak the language of business and in our field of real estate to really be able to be successful.
All this still makes good business sense. Great career advice. All right, last question. Let's say someone's listening right now and they're just jumping into this green building movement. You've been in it a while. I have too. What words of encouragement do you have for someone that's just jumping in right now?
There is so much room for improvement, and you would be surprised by how much low-hanging fruit there is. And one of the things that's hard about my job is I've been squeezing energy efficiency out of Kilroy's buildings for 10 years. And for somebody who's just jumping in, the great thing is I have a lot of envy for companies like that, because what investors really want is they want to see that delta. They want to see progress. They want to see those big numbers, especially if they can attribute influence to it. And so that's what they want. And so when you are able to go get that low-hanging fruit, you immediately make this big splash on the scene, and it's great. And it's the right time. We want you to come in. Don't stay on the sidelines anymore. And it's funny because we're there with embodied carbon right now. I mean, the first 10 to 15% reduction in embodied carbon you can do for a completely cost neutral basis just by being a little bit smarter about your concrete and your steel. I mean, it sort of reminds me, Charlie, of, you remember the early days where like people discovered occupancy sensors and everybody's just giving each other awards for reductions for just not keeping the lights on all the time, as if that's like anything except a no-brainer. That's really where we are on the carbon side. So I'd say for people on the sidelines, come in. It is not too late. Tons of people are joining. I'm doing probably an informational every other week for a new company that wants to join, wants to get in on sustainability and wants to know where to get started. So don't worry. There's plenty of room in the pool. Jump on in.
Love it. Well, Sarah, what an inspiring conversation. And we'll put some links down to the show notes, but I just want to say thank you and keep up the great work. You're an inspiration, not just in commercial real estate, but obviously women in sustainability, women in leadership positions here, and you're making change. And just glad we were able to hear a little more of your story. So thanks so much for your time.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At GBES.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.